Intrigue and romance behind the scenes at the top are a turn-on for a writer from Wales who likes to cut a dash in town. Nesta Wyn Ellis, a journalist who turned to politics and then to writing, likes to turn Westminster gossip to her advantage. Today she's dropping in to see her publisher. She wants to talk about her latest book. It's nearly finished, and decisions have to be made on how to market it as a bestseller.
Hi, Nesta. Oh, lovely to see you. How are you? Come in, darling. Come in.
We enter the glamorous world of pop publishing.
So, it's lovely to see you. Did you have a nice Christmas?
Yes, thank you very much. It was lovely.
Good. What did you do?
First, there's a sales review of her last book, A Guide to Britain's Most Eligible Bachelors. Nesta has a very rich husband in America, but in London, she lives a decidedly single lifestyle.
Well, look, Bachelors did brilliantly well over Christmas. As I was saying to you earlier on, Harrods had a terrific, great big pile of them that all disappeared.
Good.
But we had a sort of slight problem with it because the shops couldn't seem to classify it. Very good response from people.
I didn't know where to put it, I agree, because everywhere I went in, it was in a different place or
I know.
whatever. You couldn't find it. Yes. Okay.
Now, what I really want to talk about today is what you want to do next. What about your autobiography?
Well, I think the problem with that is that I've more or less decided to shelve it for a while because I feel that, you know, it would be upsetting for my husband and things like that if I got too much of the wrong sort of publicity. Because I think the thing is, naming names is all right, because it's very hard to tell some parts of that story without naming political people that I was very closely involved with emotionally as well as in politics, because the two things went together.
Sure.
But it's the way these things are received these days that worries me.
Yeah, they do delight in tearing you to pieces, don't they?
So it's almost worth kind of, you know, just leaving everybody guessing. But then it's just not a commercial enough product without the names.
Nesta's London home is discreetly rather fashionable. It's not Belgravia or trendy Dockland, but a solid square in West 1. It's been an interesting address over the years.
The flat that I live in, I bought from Lady Avon, who's the widow of Sir Anthony Eden, of course, the former Prime Minister. Downstairs, Ringo Starr owned the flat in the 60s and I think the early 70s. So there were a lot of people in there who were famous names like John Lennon, Yoko Ono, Jimi Hendrix, and all the Beatles circles. And then behind this house, which is also part of this house, is number 4 Bryanston Mews East, which was lived in by Dr. Stephen Ward, the osteopath, and Christine Keeler, and I think Mandy Rice Davis was there too, where, of course, the shot that started the Profumo affair was fired.
One thing I always like to do when I go in a strange house for the first time, is peek at the bookshelf.
Oh, yes.
Because I feel that by looking at these, I learn a lot about you.
Some of the contents of my mind, I should think.
And these are about the mind. The books are about the mind.
Yes, they are. They are. It's one of my primary interests is the mind, the psyche, the spirit, if you like, the whole connection between the three and of the mystical.
Some people say it's hocus pocus, though, not quite sort of legit.
Well, some people like, you know, I mean, it's wise to be sceptical, not to be taken in by things, which is why I have a range of books, really, which are both scientific and then, if you like, the books about how it's done. And astrology, for instance, is actually quite a scientific method for divining character. Character is part of my work. I'm interested in how it plays out in different contexts. And, of course, this is important as a novelist, as a biographer, whatever.
And, of course, most people have other people's books on the shelf, but you've got Nesta's books on the shelf.
Well, they're growing in number.
An early one.
An early one, yes.
The Truth About MPs. When did you write this one?
In 1972 and 3, I wrote it. It was published in 74.
Based on your experience in politics?
Based on my experience, yes.
Yeah. And this one, this is the paperback, and I think the picture gives us a hint, because this is slightly racy.
It is slightly racy, yes. I think the cover's a bit down market of the actual book, but that's because, you know, W.H. Smith, like...
That's publishing.
Yes.
But The Banker's Daughter, anyone to do with you?
Not really, no. It's a story of politics and of high drama in high places.
And high drama in high places again. This is the one. I think most people know you for this one, don't they?
That's right,
John
yes.
Major.
John Major, that's what really hit the fan, I think.
I'm glad you just said hit the fan and didn't complete the sentence.
It's far removed from where Nesta grew up beside the River Conwy at Llanrwst in North Wales. Then, as now, it was a quiet market town where her father worked in the local bank.
My father was very special to me. I mean, some people, you know, get on better with one parent than the other, and I definitely adored my father. My mother was really tough with me, and I don't have, you know, memories of great affection for her, but I adored my father, who was very soft and gentle.
And Llanrwst, the Llanrwst you grew up in the 50s?
Well, yes, now Llanrwst, I think, again, is quite an important. I was back there in the summer this past year, and I hadn't been there for 8 years, so it had a very powerful emotional effect on me. I could feel all this stuff stirring around inside me, and I think I couldn't have stayed too long, actually. I wasn't sure whether it was pulling me down or up, because your past is so loaded with all sorts of experiences. So I was with friends who lived there, and I, you know, stayed with them, and we walked by the river and had tea in Hunty Bont and all the sort of nice things that I always did do in Llanrwst. And, you know, it's really very, very good to see a place that's so pretty and so compact in some way.
When you were growing up in Llanrwst as a girl, what was life like there?
Oh, pretty dreary, really. I mean, I worked very hard at my studies, but mostly I was working hard at extracurricular things. As a child and as a teenager, I was doing a lot outside school, and I was, again, my parents, and again, a lot of people did this. I mean, there was the chapel for a start. Everybody was always putting on plays, musicals. You know, we were always dancing, singing, acting, reciting, competing in Eisteddfods. There was a lot of work to be done in that direction. And then there were some outdoor activities too. Later on, I used to do a lot of walking in the mountains, and I used to love doing things like tracking, and astronomy was one of my pursuits as well. I read almost everything you could possibly get your hands on astronomy, mostly from the library. So it was, you know, the little Llanrwst library was ordering books left, right and centre for me.
At that stage, did you see your future as being away from Llanrwst? I mean, there you are, stargazing.
Oh, yes, always.
I mean, you were stargazing,
Yes.
literally.
Yes, I always knew that I was going to leave Llanrwst and go out into the world and do something, but I wasn't quite sure what. And I suppose as my teens went on, I became more and more impatient. And I remember there was a rock I used to go and sit on, and you could look down into the valley and see Llanrwst, you know, with the smoke rising from the chimneys of all the little houses, and see the mist along the valley and all the rest of it. And I used to sort of gaze at this landscape, and I used to kind of just dream, if you like, and at the same time look out into the world and somehow see everything on a different scale, because I always believe in going a bit higher up to do that. And so that was very much my habit, was to look out and sort of foment to some extent about what life would be like outside. And I was longing, you know, to be free of the chains of my very disciplined life in Llanrwst.
She went to Liverpool University. It was the heyday of the Beatles, and she quickly switched on to the 60s scene.
It was only my last year that I got involved in politics and in journalism. I began writing for the university magazine, and I decided I had to choose a political party because I felt that the world was, you know, was actually going to be crisis-ridden, and that I couldn't just sit by. So I decided I had to make some kind of a move, and that was the beginning, if you like, of a life which I'm still leading, politics and writing.
Which political party did you choose?
Well, I'd put a lot of thought into it, and I listened to speakers from all parties. And I chose the Liberal Party because the speeches that were made by the people who came for the Liberal Party seemed to strike a chord with me. And I think I'd been brought up in a household where certainly my father was definitely a Liberal. I think my mother wasn't. But Wales was a fairly liberal environment as well, certainly North Wales. And so it seemed to be a natural thing for me. So I wasn't choosing a party that would get me to Parliament as an MP. I wasn't thinking about being an MP. I was simply thinking about joining a party, committing myself, possibly doing some work for that party, and not remaining outside in a kind of don't know area.
But within a short time, there you are standing for Parliament. Where was your first choice to stand?
Well, I didn't, you know, I mean, there again, that was another thing that more or less happened to me. I went and made a speech at the London Liberal Party about Rhodesia, and everyone was very impressed with this short speech that I made just off the cuff. So I had a lot of invitations to stand as a candidate, and I was only 24 at that time. So
Making quite a hit.
So, yes, exactly. And I was always doing my best to look a lot older. You know, probably looked older then than I look now, because now I try to look younger, naturally. But at 24, in the 60s, you needed gravitas. And there I was, all rosy-cheeked, you know.
What did you make of politicians, especially the men?
I like politicians very much. There's something in me which just sort of warms towards them, because however silly they are and whatever things they say that you disagree with, somehow there's always that energy that they're putting out. They actually want to change things. They want to help people. And some of them may be misguided, but, you know, we only find the right direction by a balance of different opinions. So I think when one is in politics, and this is what you find in the House of Commons too, is the camaraderie of people who may have completely different views, is that they respect each other just because they know they're all in the same game, and they are actually trying to do something to make society a better, smoother run, to correct injustices. We've got, on the whole, a good bunch of politicians in this country, better probably than in other countries, I think, from what I've seen.
In the 70s, Nesta stood several times for the Liberals. She was a candidate for Westminster and for Europe, but was never elected. Then romance intervened in Africa, where she met an extremely wealthy American.
I had actually had 2 witch doctors throw the bones for me, and both had predicted I'd be married in 6 months. Kenya was always a sort of home for me, and I was going to stay there for a while before coming back here. So I went and met my friends, and one of them said, "You should meet Edward Moss, who's the chairman of the Mount Kenya Safari Club, and you should do an article about the Safari Club." So I said, okay, fine, and that's how I met my husband. So in fact, 6 months later, we were married, and that was the extraordinary thing, you know, the witch doctors were right. And after this, we lived on 3 continents. And I think while we lived in Africa, our life together was absolutely happy, and it was fine. There were quarrels and rows, because my husband is extremely volatile and quite a difficult man, and admits this himself, but somehow we always righted it and got on with it. Somehow after we left Africa, things began to go a bit downhill, though I think they didn't go wrong completely for another 5 or 6 years.
So why didn't you go over to the States and live with him there? Or why didn't he come over here and live with you here?
Although he loves this country very much, I think he is very much an American at heart, and somehow it was a sort of difficult thing for him, and he had a lot of friends.
And although you like America, you rather like London.
I love America, but I was actually torn, because I said, I'm not prepared to start all over in America from scratch and have people say, Nesta who? I've got a bit of a name here, and I'm going to trade on it and get on with what I want to do next, which is do more books. So that was part of it, so I had to keep my end up here a bit. We were married in the beginning of 79. By the end of 86, really, I'd seen the writing on the wall, and I felt that my marriage was taking far too much of my energy without bringing any results, and that I would actually do better if I spent more time in London pursuing my own interests and getting back to full-time work. And so, really, I think because there was a huge disagreement about the property in Washington, which he wanted to sell because he wanted to live on the boat, I said, fine, I'll stay here. And I thought, he doesn't agree with me about anything, and it's always done his way, so sod it, I'll lead my own life. And that's how it began to...
And you do lead your own life, because
I do.
You're not shy about saying that even though you're married to a man in America, You don't lead the life for none, do you?
No, well, why should I, really? It's ridiculous, very bad for the health. So I said to my husband, you know, would you like a divorce, or would you like to carry on as we are and just sort of visit each other? So he opted for the latter.
She works hard to stay in trim. She also worked hard on her look, and she had the break. Nesta's lucky break was working on the background of one John Major before he was Prime Minister. When Mr. Major entered number 10, Nesta had already been asked to write about a politician, then fairly obscure.
Woman's Journal were giving me a lot of work at the time, and the editor asked me if I would like to do an article about John Major, because she knew that I could often get politicians to agree to be interviewed.
And what was he then?
Well, I hadn't actually heard of the man, really, other than sort of remotely. I'd heard the name now and again, you know, so I didn't know much about him. He was then just been promoted to Foreign Secretary, and of course he was beginning to look like a hot property. So that was July 1989. He'd just got the job of Foreign Secretary. In September 1989, I was interviewing him. He agreed to be interviewed after I wrote to him. We had a marvellous afternoon, about 4 or 5 hours together in his house in Huntingdon. And during the course of the afternoon, I said, I would like to write a book about you, because I always knew there were publishers always saying, Nesta, why don't you do political biography? But we could never find the right person. I tried David Owen, and he'd said it was too soon. And, you know, poor chap, it was very soon too late. But anyway, that was not the case with John Major, who also said, but it's too soon. And I said, you'd be surprised, and told him about David Owen. And he said, well, you know, I'll think about it. Now, this is, again, the typical John Major system. He thinks about it. He asks everybody in sight what they think about it, and then he still doesn't take a decision.
Careful man.
That's right, a careful man.
So when you first met John Major, what did you make of him? First impression?
But there's so many sort of pompous twerps, sort of full of their own self-importance in politics. And he was not like that at all. There was this modesty and this very, very quiet, low-key sensitivity. And he is sensitive, of course. That's one of the disadvantages of this man as Prime Minister, is extreme sensitivity. As one of the things he said to me, when, you know, that he'd been a tortoise rather than a hare. And I said, well, I think I've been a tortoise too, actually. And he said, neither of us has the shell for the job. And I thought that was quite a good observation, because he was obviously watching me quite closely too. By this time he was in number 10.
So when he got into number 10 and he was there, he was a man in power, and you're writing the book about him, how did you find him as Prime Minister? Because some people thought he was a bit ordinary, a bit boring, a bit grey, didn't they?
Well, that's how he strikes one, certainly through his interviews in front of TV cameras. He's not a good speech maker either. He has this monotonous delivery, and he can't seem to respond to that sort of situation. He's quite good in the House of Commons because it's combat, and he likes that. Prime Minister's Question Time, have a fight with the opposition. John Major's got a lot of fight in him, and that sort of brings him to life. But when he's just delivering a speech or talking to cameras, he's actually very tedious.
You got a bit of stick, I mean, from the reviewers when the book came out, because they're talking about you're the biographer who talks about, you know, John and Norma, about the private life, about perhaps even the sexual life. And this isn't an area where political biographers should venture. Do you accept that?
Well, no, because again, you see, I think what's going on in the private life is going to determine what goes on in the public life. And I think if the private life is unhappy or difficult, then it may influence the public life.
Since that book came out, Downing Street no longer wants to know Nesta Wyn Ellis. They refused her request to be filmed outside number 10. Maybe Nesta spilled too many beans about John and Norma.
The falling out really probably came when I criticised him very heavily in the summer of '92 because he'd been in the ERM for far too long. And I knew that, you know, this was the most horrendous problem, and I was writing a chapter for my Japanese edition. They wanted an extra chapter. So I wrote this chapter, which was in fact an absolute castigation of his economic policy and his monetary and financial policy. And it was a long chapter. And I sent it to him, and I said, look, you know, I'm sorry about this. This is what I think about what you're doing. And I think that you're making a terrible mistake. So anyway, Black Monday happened just at about this point, Black Wednesday rather, happened just about this point. And so I just simply wrote to him again, and I said, you know, if you go back into the ERM, no one will ever forgive you. And I hope that message went home.
Secrets from between the sheets of politics are now being fed into her next book, Affairs of State. Nesta knows that her readers love the scent of scandal.
If I'm writing a book, I work late at night, 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, even until dawn, depending how it's going. Then, of course, I sleep late. And then I'm just completely out of kilter with everybody else, and the answering machine picks up all the calls, and I call back later when I'm sort of ready to.
Has all this made you a wealthy woman?
No, it has not. It has not made me wealthy, and I think that. But I am wealthy in other ways. I'm happy in that I always have nice men in my life. I always have, if you like, a sort of happy times. I have good health. Those are forms of wealth. We mustn't think of wealth as only being money, because we'd be pretty miserable if we just had money and none of these good things. I live in a nice place, it's very convenient. All these things are forms of wealth. So a bit of cash now I think we need to feather the old nest for the years ahead.
Will the next book do it? Will it be a big seller?
I don't know. You see, I think a lot depends on the degree to which the publisher will promote a book and distribute it. And most authors are absolutely stymied by the fact that they don't get the distribution, so that even though they may be promoting the book to their utmost, and the book will be heard of and written about and on television and so on, if it's not distributed properly in the shops, then it won't sell, and you won't get into that coveted first 10 of the bestsellers list.
How are you going to control your own fate in the years to come now?
Well, I have certain plans which depend, I think, on the success of forthcoming novels, really. I mean, I think it would help enormously. We have some American and German interest now in Affairs of State as a TV series. If something like that was to happen, that would put me in a completely different category as a world bestseller. So that would give me the cash to launch a few other projects. I'm very interested in writing some plays, perhaps making the odd film, drama type. I mean, I'm interested also in doing something in the political world, and I don't mean to be a candidate for any office. I mean to actually have quite a learned group of people, if you like, who would offer intellectual and ideological leadership to the world, some kind of foundation or think tank. And I think that if there was enough cash flowing through my life, I could finance an office and that kind of thing, perhaps to do that kind of work. And I'd also like to have some certain charitable foundations which would help young writers and also help children who live in urban areas who never get to the country. Those kinds of things. I would like to do those kinds of things. And if I don't get the money myself, then I'll have to think about separating off the time to raise the money from other people to do them.
Little Nesta who sat above Llanrwst and thought about things.
Yes.
Is still there in you.
It's still there. I'm still, if you like, plotting and planning, though you go through phases where you're too busy to plot and plan. But now I'm going through another planning phase and another rethink, and I'm trying to decide how I should live my life.
I wondered if writing all this fiction was a reaction to the rumpus over Mr. Major. Wouldn't she prefer to get stuck into the real meat of politics and politicians once again?
Well, people are always asking me if I'm going to do another Prime Ministerial biographer, and of course I might, because you see, Prime Ministers come and go, but biographers keep writing.
I keep finding out secrets.
Indeed.
What about Tony Blair? Do you fancy writing one on him?
Not at the moment, no. He's quite an interesting man, but he's not Prime Minister yet, and I don't know that he will be.
Ah. But if he is, would you be in the queue?
I don't want to be in a queue, really.
You want to be at the top of the queue?
Yes.
Oh, c'est ça. Ce gentil millionnaire a vraiment toutes les qualités qui peuvent me contenter avec ce millionnaire. Je suis sûr qu'on ne doit pas s'embêter